Hey everyone, welcome back to the Magnanimous Collective. I'm your host, Sean Kubota. Let's start it off with a deep breath into the belly. And let it go. Oh yeah, dropped in. Today I have a very special guest, one of my brothers from our men's work organization, Sacred Sons. That's how we met. He's a beloved husband, a men's work leader, an experiential marketing guide, producer. Him and I have had some really profound and special moments within men's work that I haven't had with anyone else, and that's brought us closer. I also really respect him as someone who has a really strong moral compass of integrity, of self-awareness, and restraint amidst a world of chaos and everything else that we've talked about. We just shared a meal. We've had some great times today, and I'm really grateful for you to take the time to come on and share with our viewers here. So without further ado, everyone please welcome Jordan Trujillo. Thank you for coming on, my guy.
Thanks for the invitation, brother.
Yeah, bro. Appreciate you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, man. It's great to be in this space with you and just to be able to have the one-on-one, because when we're in the midst of all the work, we get little drop-ins, and this time, like I was saying before we got started, I get to know how a Jordan is made, right? Yeah. And I know a little bit, we've touched on a little bit, and obviously through the really big things that we don't have the gaps filled in for, like I know those parts that we've experienced in the work. But for our viewers, for me, in whatever context and capacity you feel comfortable with, tell us about these certain incidences in your life where you have been challenged, back against the wall, had to make choices where society may have dictated that you choose otherwise, choose the path of the victim, choose a specific narrative that wasn't necessarily being chosen for you. When did you start to choose your own reality and say, I'm going to go a different way? What were those moments in time?
I would say there was some turbulent times in high school where I had to make some tough choices. I felt like during that time, there's this coming of age. There's like a coming of age story that's happening throughout the arc of human development, and didn't always make decisions for the best. And I would say like my like consciousness journey or self-awareness journey started in my early 20s, where I started to undo a lot of the things that were wound up from my childhood, wound up from those formative teenage years, and was seeing some of the detrimental effects of like where I was going, and had to really reel it back in and become a lot more conscious of my inner dialogue, the people I was spending time with, what my trajectory was in life. And yeah, there's like, there's these other checkpoints throughout my life where I have had to make strong and challenging choices based off of what I was picking up in my awareness.
What are those specifically that you're referring to?
Yeah. So, I mean, coming back to what makes up a Jordan, that's the question, right? Yeah. So, when I was, my home life was very loving and also very challenging as a kid.
Same.
Parents not always on the same page. Trying to be vague here because I don't want to divulge too much of someone else's story. But I would say like the pendulum swaying between like very loving, caring, giving, safe place to very unsafe and fearful place, and created a lot of behavior within our family where I felt like I was walking on eggshells, and didn't know how the people in my house would respond to me, whether I was going to get that like beautiful, loving, nurturing, like with cariño, like receptivity, or I was going to get the other side of the pendulum or the other side of the coin, of the opposite of that.
I can completely relate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Parallel.
Yeah. So, so that created a Jordan that was hyper aware of people's emotional state. And so I think in a way I was always reaching out outside of me to do like quick checks. Where's this person coming from? How are they regulated? How are they not regulated?
Tracking, essentially.
Yeah. And then how do I show up in response to that?
Right.
So it created, in a way, like this keen awareness of how to read a room or how to read people, and not read them in the sense of like, knowing their story, but at least getting a pulse understanding of where they are in their regulation
with minimal information.
More on an energetic level.
Right. Yeah. Nonverbal cues, like really just like I got to work with what I got because it's kind of do or die. Like where are they at right now?
Yeah.
Bro, I love you. With the little bit of info that we're also talking about here, we're also getting a lot too, because what you're talking about is something that I'm in complete parallel with. And I think that's why we also had that very specific moment within that event where, I got to hold space for you. Like, I think there was a very, an awareness of correlation of story there.
Yeah.
And I can completely parallel to this aspect of walking on eggshells, being very used to. It's very interesting when you have an environment that is loving and supportive and generous, and yet is also at the same time in the flip of a switch, like entirely brutal and cold and without love. For me it was shame, expectation, like these things where it was just like not my shit, wasn't my shit, right?
Yeah.
But being met with that, there was like the side of like, oh, I love you, I want you to be all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And then there's also like the ancestral stuff. Like, I don't know if that was from them or their parents or what, but it was like, oh, whoa, what if whatever that is some shadow? And having to pick up on the things like, oh, where are they at? Oh, like, there's certain things that I can't say or can say, or like, oh, like you said, walking on eggshells. So I completely relate. So going forward from that, like how did that develop you into the man you are today? Like, were there times were there things that you did in order to kind of alleviate that stress or that pain? Like, what did that lead to?
That led to, some deep, dark places. When I was in high school, my parents were, so home life was challenging.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of like explosive energy. Like we would have these crazy what I referred to as like blowout fights. It was like a family fight. We would just, I don't even know how they would get started. It would just like unravel and become out of control. And I remember as a kid, like running down the street barefoot, like no shoes on, just getting out of the house just to get away. And so yeah, like from kind of like turbulent, but also extremely loving, like family, like we were tight knit, like I'm still really close with all my family.
Totally.
Me too. And so there was like, but the range of emotions that lived in my household were so big.
Yeah.
And so having those types of experiences as I became more of a teenager and going into high school, I had a lot of like unprocessed, if you want to use the word trauma or wounds or emotional baggage that I was carrying, and things kind of compounded in high school with all the peer pressure and things like that. I chose a route where I went into like skateboarding and BMX riding and had a lot of really amazing times with the friends group that I had, but I also went kind of like deep into drinking and partying and being in scenarios that weren't necessarily so supportive of my growth.
Right.
And during that time, my parents were getting a divorce. They were in a separation. There was a death in the family. And there was addiction in my family, people going to rehab, and it was it was a really challenging time to navigate. And then amidst a divorce, like the nuclear family being kind of ruptured, I fell into like some really deep depression when I was in high school, and came very close to
Checking out.
And so from that place, man, it's a trip talking about this, especially on a podcast.
Well, we're just eternal. We're just talking.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a podcast, and yet is it? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm here for it, bro. Thanks for the invitation.
I mean, you know,
we're diving in.
All in your sovereignty, all in your personal choice.
Yeah.
And we can always, you know, whatever. But
yeah. And you know, like, I guess when I think back on it, you know, there's like humans are like pack animals. So even though like I wasn't sharing what was going on to like my brother or my mom or my father or my younger sister, I felt like they on some level was feeling the disparity and challenges that I was going through.
yeah.
And we had tried to integrate some pieces of like conscious communication. We tried to, my parents, you know, God bless them, like were trying to bring through like family meetings. But I feel like there weren't the tools at that time for me to feel safe enough to really share what was going on and to be vulnerable. And so it just led to me bottling it up, pushing it down, and ultimately getting to like a really hard place with just facing kind of like daily life. And on the flip side of that, coming out of that, I started to listen to books and to read books that were more about paying attention to my inner dialogue. And I realized that like the space in between my ears was like a really heavy place, and my inner dialogue was really intense and very self-critical, and just was constantly kind of like beating myself up. And so it took years, probably a good decade, to really unwind a lot of that inner dialogue and self-talk that was really, I feel, holding me down and holding me back from being a fully functioning like Jordan Trujillo. Yeah. And yeah, a lot of it was personal. I started going to therapy. That was helping me at least have a place where I could share my story, right, and to start to tune into some of the emotions that were being like compacted. Repressed, it was like soil that was compacted and cracked and just dead. Yeah. It's like, so it started to create a space where I could just let some of that out. Let it up to the surface. But you know, for me, therapy has also been a place where it's like, it's often an hour. By the time you get in, it's like, you know, I get settled, 15 minutes goes by, we start to talk about the thing, and then it's like, we have maybe 30 minutes to like dive into it. And then it's like, okay, I got to pack it all back up again, because I got to go back to work or go back to school or go back, you know, to see this thing and go back to being my daily life thing. So it was great to start to breathe life and to breathe air into these spaces again. Yeah. But it also like was only able to touch so far. Right. But it got me by. And life started to feel easier and brighter. And I decided to get serious about school. So now I'm like in my early 20s, and I had a friend who had passed away. It was an accidental overdose, and that put me in a tailspin. And then coming out of that, I started to get really serious about school, and I started to have more of a focus of like, where am I going? What am I doing with my life?
I got to ask you, because those books that had you be conscious of that voice between your ears, they don't just land out of anywhere. Who gave you those? How did that come about to then lead you on this path? Was that just a conscious choice where you were like, I need to get some personal development books? Because that just kind of came out of nowhere from being in such a dark space. Yeah. So during my parents' divorce, my mom enrolled in a program. It's called it's through USM, University of Santa Monica, and it's called it was a master's in spiritual psychology.
And she started to go through that. I think really she joined the program not to be a practitioner, and I don't want to speak for her, but I think it was really about her and her own healing journey. She was really trying to find her voice and really trying to find herself and to tap into her emotional body and to also start to unwind these things that she didn't necessarily have tools for growing up to be aware of.
Yeah.
And so it's probable that a book maybe came through that channel. My aunt has always been really supportive of my personal growth. And my godmother is a spiritual practitioner. So she's always been there to help kind of guide from afar and to help, drop some things off for me, leave some things on the table for me to find kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So I've always had like some beautiful angels surrounding
what a
me
blessing.
and helping me in that way. So I don't remember like where the books came from, but they just started to show up.
Wow.
And some of them were like Eckhart Tolle and other books like that.
Fuck yeah.
And sometimes I've heard like quotes, and I don't always agree now with some of the things that are shared in those books, but it was what I needed to hear at that time.
100%. What a shift, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that from being in such a dark space, of such a self-defeating space, to reading something like Eckhart Tolle, like that's a giant leap. So I love hearing that, but I'm just like, wow.
And it started to bridge that piece through that I think that you shared about in your intro podcast of like choosing my own reality.
Yeah.
Of like, I believe that to a certain extent. Like I have certain powers, I have certain capabilities within my power to choose how I respond to something.
Absolutely.
And that's like the baseline of becoming responsible is the ability to respond. And so it reminds me of one of our brothers that says, with this awareness, what will I choose? Right. So it was like that baseline understanding of like, all this shit is happening to me that I feel powerless to. So it was a beginning of a reclaiming and a rewriting of the story of like, actually, you know what? I have the ability to choose how I respond to these things, how I engage with these things. I can choose relationships that are not codependent. There's a huge line of codependency in my family, on both sides. So it's like coming back to that place of sovereign, right? So that was like, that was like my baseline of like, okay, I'm like one step at a time. I'm chugging through, I'm learning these, I'm picking up these pieces and I'm starting to move through my life, trying to integrate little by little. And like school was, in high school, I barely graduated high school. I was like not college bound. I actually was looking into maybe like I would join the military afterwards, which I'm so glad I didn't, because we went to Iraq and Afghanistan right after that. And like, I had friends that served, and it was a very intense situation to be in. And if I had chosen that path, I probably would have learned different lessons. Right. But in hindsight, I actually remember the words of my mother when I told her that I wanted to join either the Marines or the Army. And she looked me in the eyes and she said, "You know that they will teach you to kill people, and then your job will be to kill people." And that just like was like a whoa moment for me. And I was like, I actually, that's not
your eyes calling.
And I know that within the military, there's a purpose for the military, and within the military, there's many different roles and responsibilities. But it was a clear hit to my heart when she said those words. And she didn't tell me what to do. She just said like, is that what you want to do? And just kind of left the question for me. Awesome. So, but coming back to this piece of like rewriting the story. In school, like I was not college bound at all in high school. I barely graduated high school, and took like just the bare minimum to graduate. And I think it was just really just a reflection of where I was at emotionally in my life. I was really disengaged. I was looking for escape. I was not stoked to be in my body or feeling the feelings that I was feeling. And so, and what happened is like in my early 20s when things started to shift for me and I had some tough love moments, I was living with my father at the time. And I had an arrangement with my father where it was like, if I was going to school part-time or not at all, I had to pay rent. And if I was going to school full-time, then I didn't have to pay rent, or I had to pay like a very small amount. It was like a reduced amount. And and at that time I was still like in my party phase and not really taking life seriously, because I can honestly look back and say that like I didn't really have the capacity to do that. But my father said at some point, he said, you either need to go back to school full time or you need to leave, because his words were, I'm not supporting your lifestyle. And it didn't matter if I was paying rent. It was just like a hard line for him. Right. And I chose to go back to school, and then 6 months later, he kicked me out anyways. And even though that was like tough, it was in some aspects like exactly what I needed. Yeah. And in hindsight, like really grateful for it. Because it was just one of those like get your shit together moments. And like the structure of school, I began to thrive in my studies. And I ended up going to community college and then transferring to UC Santa Cruz and graduating with honors. Wow. And so yeah, it was a pretty quick, like kind of 180 that I did. Yeah. And I had some amazing mentors at school that really saw something in me that I wasn't able to see in myself. And they really started to like nurture that thing that they saw in me. Yeah. I started taking, I thought I was going to study like communication, or I was maybe interested in like English lit. I loved reading cool stories. I loved to journal, and I thought that was kind of like my path. And then I went on to get credits and to get out of the classroom. Yeah. I took a field biology course, and it was actually a joint course. It was focusing on writers from the Central Coast of California and the ecology of Central Coast of California. And we ended like the pinnacle of the experience was taking a 1 week field trip to the Central Coast, spending time in the redwoods, reading this poetry and like these amazing authors from the area. Yeah. And it inspired me and lit something inside of me that I was like, yes, this is amazing. And the professors from that course started to invite me back as a TA for future years. And so I began to develop, I would say maybe like my first mentorship experience, where somebody was seeing something in me and just really, like watering that seed and inviting me to show up more. And that sent me on a trajectory to study environmental studies and conservation ecology at UC Santa Cruz. Graduating with honors, that took me on a whole nother path of like conservation work. I worked in that field for about 8 years, and took me to live in Ecuador. I managed an ecological reserve. I ran internship programs, and then that led to me running programs in the Galapagos Islands. You're getting the whole story here. Yeah. So from like depressed late teens, early 20s, looking for escape to all of a sudden like super focused in school, graduating, making great connections, moving out of the country, which was like a huge thing for me to really like go where I knew no one, to buy a one-way ticket to another country, to go live in the coastal rainforest of Ecuador. For how long? The contract was for a year. And then, and this was like a rustic living condition. It was like, and it was remote. It was like, from the city, it was an 8-hour bus to the coast out of the Andes. So out of Quito, 8-hour bus down the Andes to the coast. Then from the nearest beach town to Quito, it was about a 45-minute bus ride. And then from there, you could catch it's called a flete. It's like like a shared taxi into this town of Camarones. And then from Camarones, it was like a hour-and-a-half hike into a canyon. And we would bring supplies in by horseback, and there was no electricity in the reserve station. It was an open air bamboo house. And that's where I lived for a year. I had to hike 45 minutes up to the hilltop to get reception. And so like, I guess to tie that into like where I was when I was in high school is like, I was feeling like I had so much purpose in my life. I was like on mission.
Yeah.
And I was doing amazing work for this earth and for this planet. And really that time in the forest, I would say that moment of like really slowing down.
Yeah.
This is like, I was like born and raised in Los Angeles, and then moved to Santa Cruz. And that was like a slowdown from city life.
Yeah.
And then moving to Ecuador was like, it really began, I would say it began my journey into
never coming back to LA again.
The man that's sitting in front of you today.
Yeah.
Like that began, I guess in the past, I would maybe describe that as like my spiritual journey, but really it was like my journey back to wholeness and back to humanness. It slowing down to the pace of like trees and rivers.
Yeah.
And not having the constant buzz and disturbance of like electricity and lights and all of these things. Like on the equator, we lived pretty much on the equator. There's no change in like daylight savings time. It's like every night the sun sets between 6 and 6:30 throughout the entire year. There's very little variation. And so with no electricity, it's like I was in bed at probably 9 p.m., you know, because
latest.
after dinner, it's like maybe you read a book by candlelight or by headlamp, play some guitar. I started teaching myself guitar when I lived in the forest, and really began to connect with the circadian rhythm of life, and to go to sleep like when the sun sets, and to wake up when the sun rises. Yeah. And to like we had showers and stuff, but I started getting in this rhythm of bathing in the river in the morning time. I would wake up and I would go in the dry season. Yeah. I would go barefoot to the river, and that would be my wake up in the morning. And it was tropical weather, so it wasn't like a cold plunge, but it was cold. And just being in that space. And I started reading some books like Carlos Castaneda books, which are like Journey to Ixtlan and things like that. And so my mind, I was like in this deep nature immersion. And then I was like getting exposed to these stories of mysticism and connecting with the powers of nature. And I started exploring like the real world, and exploring in my own way. Like sometimes I would go down to the river at night and I would turn off my headlamp and I would just walk around in the dark. And it scared the hell out of me. And was also like, I in the darkness, I was finding out so much about myself and so much about where I was. And wow, I don't know how much, should I go into all this story? Well, where are we going? Because I have so much like that I could share about this, and like how that was also like my gateway into ceremony. Yeah. There was a man who, his words is, I practice medicine, and his medicine was working with sacred plants in the forest, and also temescal, and also deep nature immersion and other things like that. And we became friends. He actually showed up at our doorstep and asked for if he could stay. We weren't open to the public. He had known a recent reserve manager. And so we said yes, and he was looking for property. He ended up buying property downriver from the reserve, and we became friends, and he began to invite me into some of these spaces, which completely changed my life. And
before we go in there, because we're saying a lot, and I love this because we're weaving.
You're probably learning stuff about me you didn't know.
We're weaving. Oh, of course not. Yeah. I mean, these types of drop-ins seldom occur. Even in like new friendships, do we ever get to really know how another person is made? And there's. You were riffing and it was just like flowing, so I didn't want to interrupt. Yeah. And yet...
Bring me back, bro. Where do you want to be?
One thing that I will say that I find that's really interesting, because from an objective space or from an outside space, when I think of Jordan, I think of someone who's very, very astute and studious in the sense of like how you conduct yourself. You maybe before you weren't closer. I don't know if you're necessarily a type A, but you definitely have these points of being poignant. You're very poignant, and you like for things to be done. And, I mean, you're a producer. Like you want things to be done right, and you're making sure that the plan is working according.
And it's also working within a certain framework of accountability.
100%. So integrity.
Trust, accountability, being out of account. Can I trust you?
Exactly.
Putting together a tight team.
Exactly. And that's what I feel from you, is that like you need to know that you can count on someone. You're building a reliable network system. And what's interesting is that like you being that person back when you're in high school and not doing good at studies and then graduating with honors and then also going like having these angels that helped you ascend from that space in high school to carry you in so that you can make that, ascent from this really down space, this depressed space, and raise you up. And like, we don't really hear about a lot of people who go from that space, from being immersed into drugs and alcohol and so forth, and then going and choosing to be studious and graduating with honors, and then going and also connecting with the real world of Mother Nature as well, because that's also another component. It's one thing for someone to find aspirations towards business and towards making money out of the means of lack of self-worth or trying to, really prove something to the world in ways of insecurity and or whatnot.
Or create control.
100%. Out of wounding. It's another thing to rise above, the fallen space, the sunken space, and then also find the path to not only slow down, but just slowing down can be, correlated with like something negative, but more so like you taking the time to listen, right? Taking the time to check in, taking the time to really assess where you're at. And so I find this fascinating how this whole space has taken you to what you said in regards to medicine work, which also led you to Sacred Sons, I'm assuming, right? To where we met. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess it depends on how you define medicine work. I wasn't deep into like the plant medicine world. I was like, what I found my medicine to be was to be lodge and the fire, tending the fire, being with the fire, being with that medicine, being with the songs, being in the womb of the mother, being close to the earth. That was my medicine. And yeah, there was like maybe some plant allies that I developed relationships with, but that wasn't like my world. And I think a common thing that people think is plant medicine, automatically think like ayahuasca. That was not my path.
Gotcha.
But yeah, where do you want to go? Do you want me to skip forward? How do you want me to navigate? Where do you want me to take you into the archives of Jordan?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. I have chocolate in my mouth.
Yeah. And thank you for the reflection, because it's like, it's been an interesting process for me to be on the podcast and to think about like, how do I condense my life story into a conversation, right? And I'm letting it kind of like with fluidity come out and to speak on the pieces that need to be spoken on. And there's I think in the beginning there was these moments where I was feeling a little crunchy about talking about certain things because some really tough shit. You know, and like people that I'm close with that I don't want to put on blast or share their stories or anything like that. So like,
something that we both relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're here, and
we are here,
and we're also in the forest. So where do you want to go next?
Yeah. Well, thank you for being cognizant enough to ask. Cognizant enough to ask. Something that feels alive and resonant. Because we could probably talk to your story till the tape runs out.
Yeah.
It may be the point in your story may have passed when it was the triumph above adversity. During this space in high school, and then choosing this thing. Maybe that was the big thing, and maybe since then you've been walking a path of sovereignty and owning that. And
I want the big thing.
Well, I
don't know if there is a big thing.
There might not be, and so
for me, it's a bunch of little things that have accumulated into who I am today.
Right, and so with that, if that's the case, then good, and we can kind of speak on that as a whole. And one thing that I would say is that when you said like talking about the first podcast and like we create a reality, was such a broad statement, right? And at the same time, what you said about being able to respond to our reality in every moment. That's essentially what I'm saying in regards to that. And not only the ability to respond, but in order to respond to our reality in a specific way, we have to first perceive it in the specific way, right? So in order for me to perceive like, hey, this bad thing that's occurring or this tragic or unfortunate thing that's happening to me is actually a blessing, is actually opportunity. First, I have to perceive it that way. And then from there, I can respond to it. And from that, I can create my reality in whatever way, in whatever type of polarity would exist in that society would dictate or normalcy would dictate that I should feel about it. And I could choose to create it in a completely different way. And that's what I mean in the sense of,
and I think within that, there's also like, am I creating it from a place of integrity, or am I creating it with manipulation and, ways that are maybe with not so much integrity? So I guess to come back to, is there a big moment in my life where it's like, I had my back up against the wall? I've had lots of moments like that. And I think that like, I guess like, I just come back to that question. Where do you want me to go from here?
Yeah, well,
cause I'm like, now I'm like 27 and I don't know.
You're 27?
No.
Oh, okay.
In the story.
Yeah,
I'm like 26, 27.
You're 30. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. No. We don't need to go through the
play-by-play.
We don't need to go through the play-by-play because ultimately, one of the goals for, obviously, we're eternalizing the conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately, with everyone who comes on here, like everyone who comes on here are people that I love and that are supremely interesting. And also what I think about is, as we talked about before this, the goal of this is to have impact, right? And I think that not only our stories carry wisdom, but I also find that your reflections in regards to these specific topics and so forth hold wisdom. And so more so than where I want to go from here, I would say that the things that are alive that come about. So one of the things that came alive was talking about medicine journey in regards to sweat lodge. Another thing that's come up is in regards to reality creation and what that looks like in regards to integrity and out of integrity. Either way, I feel like when we're creating our reality by how we perceive it and respond to it, we're still doing it, even if we're doing it subconsciously, maliciously, in integrity, in whichever way. The thing that I'll say that is important to me is that we get to a space within society where it becomes normalcy, or at least broadcasted, instead of being broadcast that people are powerless and that they forget who they are and that they're basically with amnesia of their supreme essence of being, that they are reminded, and we start to begin to recalibrate to the understanding that regardless of what we choose, whether it's something that is bad, quote unquote bad, or something of lesser, state of consciousness like victimhood or so forth, that at least we're choosing it. At least we are reaffirming within the psyche of humanity that we are powerful enough to create the reality based on how we choose to perceive and respond to it. And so more so than where we go from here, because I don't even know where we're going. And
how exciting.
Yeah. And also we're already there. And with that, I'd say more so than the big moments or the big shocker value or whatever, more so in regards to the vein of that. Or maybe it's in regards to the vein of how being in the womb and in the sweat lodge and singing the songs, what that means to you, what topic there feels most alive for you.
For me,
yeah,
I think for me, what it began to aliven in me and for me to become aware of was like, I was already developing a deep relationship with the natural world. And it's even weird for me to say like the natural world, because it's just what is all around us and what's within us. And,
right.
But it was like, I was developing that deep relationship. And then it's like, oh, wow, there's ceremonies to connect even deeper and to honor that relationship even deeper. And to also acknowledge like how we're relating to her and how do we get back in right relationship with her. And so that's what like began to really break my heart open was that there is a culture and many cultures, and those cultures are also in my lineage of like being in deep relationship with the earth and connecting our hearts with her heart. Yeah. And so
like nature is God type of space.
It began to like softened something in me that needed to be softened, if that makes sense.
Like a humbling.
Humbling, bringing me back to my heart, bringing me back to question myself. Well, how am I showing up and how am I walking in this world? And what kind of impact am I having?
Yeah.
And how are my relationships not only impacting others, but how is that impacting me? Is that hurting me?
Right.
You know, so it's like all of those pieces started to kind of become more illuminated. Yeah. So I would say like that's kind of like another springboard into like deeper into this path that has led me towards my own self-development work, my own self-awareness work, my own exploration of painful moments of my past and those traumas that created the patterns, that created the way that I operate, that operating system that I didn't even become aware of, and how to start to unwind and unravel that and to breathe new life into those stagnant places.
Yeah, I feel that. And yet the thing that comes up for me when you say these things, like obviously I understand addiction, and there's also a lot of people who would be like, ceremonies, breathing in her, what is he talking about? Right. And people might have somewhat of an understanding of ceremonies, but do they? I don't know. When you say her, who's this gender, right? Who's this person? What is it gender? But specifically you're speaking about when we talk about ceremonies, like if you were to break that down, because for those of us who have been a part of it, it's very commonplace. And for those of us who haven't, when we're talking about getting in right relation with her, when we're talking about doing ceremonies, tell me what it means to do that. What does it mean to hold a ceremony and get in right relation with her, with Mother Earth? And why is that important? And how do you do that? And what is the process and the internal process in which you hold that?
That is a great question. I mean, like, all right, it's like saying
no wrong answers.
It's almost like saying like, describe eating a strawberry to someone who's never eaten a strawberry.
Sour, a little sweet.
Okay, so how to describe a ceremony? Well, there's many different types of ceremonies, obviously.
I don't know. Objective observer. Let's start off with why it's important.
Yeah, for me, there's a deep place of coming back to my humbleness, of realizing that like in all the ways that I operate in my waking life of reality of like, oh, I know all these things, I have all this experience, and then for me to come back and to humble myself to spirit, to creator, to the earth, and to remind myself that in reality I know nothing, and I'm actually here just to listen. I'm here to be open and receptive to what my ancestors want to tell me, to what the earth wants to tell me, to what spirit wants to tell me, and to humble myself back to being a child, because that's what I am. I'm a child of the earth. I'm a child of the mountains. I've been birthed from the rivers. You know, it's like, and this may sound a little woo-woo and abstract, but this is where we come from.
Yeah.
This is where we come from.
Yeah.
And so for me, there's like that humbleness piece. There's a piece of coming back into deep reverence. There's also a big piece around coming back to gratitude, of being grateful for my life, being grateful for my breath, being grateful for having another day on this planet as a human being. There's and those moments come depending on the ceremony, the container, the space that someone may be navigating. But let's, for example, take Lodge. There's a moment where I am so grateful for water afterwards. I'm so grateful to breathe air that doesn't burn my lungs. Yeah. And so it's like, it's in some ways creating these really intense moments to also build faith that like, sometimes doing hard and challenging things builds the faith and belief in, and oh, wow, I can make it through something like that.
Absolutely.
And even though that was hard and challenging and intense and maybe a little scary, there's a big lesson behind that.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that lesson.
Yeah. The perseverance. Seeing how resilient we are.
And also watching the mind.
Yeah.
When the fear starts to kick in and the stories start to kick in, I can't breathe, I need to get out, it's too much.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, return to the song, return to the breath.
Yeah.
Return, where are the drums? Okay, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm okay. And we're making it through, and we're also making it through together.
Yeah. Hope. Yes. And while you're saying all these things, and one of my favorite topics to tie into this, just in regards to magnanimous collective reality creation, all these things, gratitude, humility, all these things. I feel like the core of it, or at the core of it, that allows for the gratitude and the grief to come into play, that allows for the individual to choose to be humble enough to be generous and forgiving in the face of their rivals and those of lesser power, which is magnanimous, right? Like, to be able to be this individual, I feel that we have to be attached to and or have online a certain level of grief. And I feel like when you're talking about ceremony, specifically when we're talking about lodge, but really any ceremony, like what I feel like happens when we go into plant ceremonies or plant medicine ceremonies, or just in general, when we are having reverence and gratitude for the finitude of this existence, like the finite experience, that things don't last forever, that we aren't able to directly receive the love from our ancestors in the ways that maybe they would have wanted us to. Like, we are the wildest dreams of our ancestors, right? And that we will have progeny, and that there's grief available there for us to not be able to protect them and save them, and that they will have to have their own journey of growth and love and misery and being broken and being built back up and all these things, and be like, I love you, but I wish I could protect you from the pain, but I can't. And even for ourselves when we're in lodge and all these things and processing all these things, at the end of the day, being attached to the grief, to the fact that things do not exist, that there are things that are out of our control, and yet the only control we have is within ourselves. There's so much there to bring online to then humble the self and be like, okay, like you said, I know nothing, and yet I know enough now to be humble. I know enough to know what matters, to some extent at least, right?
In some instances, I would say it's like humbling. There's a humbling to remember. And that's like the biggest piece. It's like the humbling to remember, the humbling to listen, and to receive from that place. And you talked also about grief and ancestry. Yeah. And when you speak of grief, what comes up for me is my grandmother. My grandmother passed a few years ago, and I was with her when she passed, and she was 96 years old, and she was my last living grandparent. And man, that was like so big. And through that grief, I remember somebody sharing with me that like grief is proof that you loved. Yeah. And to me, that like really connected the two, that I wasn't able to connect on my own. Yeah. And it just like, it brought it straight through. Yeah. And it made the grief more integrated, if that makes sense.
100%.
Like, instead of like this abstract thing, oh, this is uncomfortable, I don't want to feel this.
Pain bad. Yeah.
Yeah, pain bad, this sucks. It brought me to a place of like, oh, that's actually my love.
Ding, 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 right?
That's my love. Yeah. And through my grief and my grieving process, I can honor that love and honor that ancestor. Yeah. And to connect with that love that connects me with my grandmother in a new way, in a different way.
Oh, yeah, I got goosies everywhere. Yeah.
You also talked about ancestry and past generations, future generations, and you also talked about being the living dream of our ancestors. And some people use the metaphor of a family tree when they talk about their ancestry. And I've been on a journey with my uncle, really diving deep into my father's side of our ancestry. And not only learning the stories of our ancestors and and who we're related to and where did they come from and what cultures did they come from, and how maybe that's still alive in our family today, and these little glimpses, and how to also remember and bring that through. But just the visual of how many ancestors are involved when I start to look at the visual structure of like, okay, there's my grandparents on both sides, and then their grandparents, and this and that.
8 generations back, thousands.
And then, it's really like, when I started to learn how many people are involved in the making of a Jordan,
bro,
it's really
overwhelming.
In a way, it's humbling and overwhelming. But what I wanted to bring through is like it started to connect to the visual. To me, it didn't look like a tree; it looked like an arrow. And so, and then there's me at the bottom of the arrow, at the tip of the spear. And to connect in a different way of like that saying, I'm at the tip of the spear of my ancestry, and they have had their time on this planet to co-create a reality, to maybe pray for future generations, to sacrifice parts of their life for people that aren't even here yet.
Sacrifices we can't even imagine.
And the responsibility that I started to feel through recognizing that, and that they have lived their lives and they are in the unseen now, and I am what is left.
You are.
And I have the amazing privilege of being on the forefront of time unfolding. And it's happening. It's happening right now. And it's like, you know what I mean? Bro. And it's like, and it's wild to think about it that way. It almost feels a little psychedelic.
It absolutely is.
And it also, for me, it comes with like a big sense of responsibility and a big sense of urgency. Of like, holy shit, I'm not going to be on this. I have that much time.
You walk different.
And so it's like, okay, what am I really here to do? Because I'm not here to drown out and drag my feet and drone out on Netflix or whatever. Like, it brings a sense of purpose and urgency to what garden do I want to plant? What forest do I want to see grow in my life? And how do I want to be of service of not only to be honorable to my ancestors, but to also honor those that haven't come yet. Build a legacy. And to be a bridge in the time unfolding. And I read something recently, and it just put words to something that I was already feeling, but it was like, and it's something that's actually since connecting with Sacred Sons and being in some of these spaces, it's something that has come up multiple times for me, where it's like there's been a new light that's been shown on epigenetics and the transcendence of trauma through generations. And I think that it goes both ways. That like, if trauma can be passed down, so can healing and right relation, and it goes backwards and forwards.
100%.
So that brings us into a conversation around like being cycle breakers, and again coming back to that place of like, how can I live my life to hopefully become a worthy elder? And a worthy ancestor. How can I live my life in a way that maybe future generations may grieve me, to honor my presence through their grief? Oh man, it makes me emotional. So it just brings new purpose to the work that we're doing here in men's containers. And I think that within men's containers, it's also almost like a stepping stone into doing what we were talking about earlier today, like people work of not being in men's containers or women's containers. Yes, we need to honor our experiences as men, and to bring back the new old way of being in counsel and of being in support of one another, instead of should I say, in reflection to a lot of modern societal masculine archetypes or ways of being, where it's like competition and tearing others down and to step on others to get to where you're going, manipulation, so on and so forth, to come back into a place where we see each other eye to eye, heart to heart, and we can be there in the most challenging of times, and also in the times of celebration, and be in the times of like where we need to confront some big pieces in us, whether it's the age-old dust that's been compacted through all of this pressurized emotion that we've shoved down, or in the moments where there's some real life shit happening in our lives, and we gotta cut that and face it. You know, bringing in some of that warrior archetypal energy to face those pieces. So yeah, this is the work. But I guess what I was saying was like, you know, women doing their work, men doing their work, and then it's like coming together and doing just human work, people work. Yeah, because that's what's going to help heal, I think, culture and society. I see a lot of what is ailing the planet, ailing our culture, threatening our existence is our cultural issues. And so like, how can we create cultural shifts in our families, in our communities, and hopefully have that ripple out effect to change some of the trajectory that we're on?
Yeah. I mean, I'm in complete agreement. And when it comes to, well, people work, I think there's the co-ed work, right? If we're going to classify that as people work. I think there's also, at least what I've shifted into in regards to like what I feel most alive for me and what's felt alive for me for years, has been working on the level of just consciousness work, human consciousness. And there's so many variables. There's so many specific things that we can point out and be like, oh, men should switch this, should align this, women should align this. Oh, this is actually on the responsibility of the men, and then the women will follow suit and this, that, and that, like the men choosing to pay for OnlyFans, all these things, blah, 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 right? And at the end of the day, you're like, why'd you go there? I'm just saying, like, when we look at OnlyFans and how we're able to basically proliferate this whole business for women to basically sell themselves this way, that's being supported by men. So isn't responsibility on the men? Can we say like, hey, women don't do this when the men are the ones supporting it? That type of thing is what I'm saying, right? So there's all these specific little things where we're like, oh, that's not good. Who's actually to blame? Or who's the one who needs to act first? For me as the man, warrior archetype, I'd be like, yo, men, get your shit together. And at the same time,
no more leaky sexual energy.
Yeah, but saying that, don't do shit, right? Same thing on the human consciousness level. Is it really that the men have to change, or are we all a collective human consciousness? And so when I think about it from a human consciousness level, rather than just like people work, but just like a collective human consciousness upgrade, it is the understanding and the remembrance of the godhood within. You know, the remembrance of that sovereignty, the remembrance of the creatorhood, the remembrance of having the responsibility of, as a child of creator, as an individual, an essence with free will that chooses to, you know, perceive and then create their reality, so forth. And that as an individual who has the ability potentially to have progeny or at least raise young, whether it's adopted or whatever, we all have the ability to foster youth, right? And doing so in a very loving way, in a way that we want them to be more. We want them to have more. We want them to be the evolution of the thing. We don't want them to be stagnant. We don't want them to be the same. We don't want them to be worse than. And if that is the case, why do so many of us have this narrative built within us, subconsciously, unconsciously, that to be more than our divine parent is blasphemous, and that is not meant for us, and that, oh, we need to shame ourselves, or all of these different things, right? That whole narrative very easily plays in and actually supports the thesis and narrative that we are to be less than, that we are victims, that we are not meant to be more, that we don't have responsibility. So if we flip that on its head, then all of a sudden we do have that responsibility. Then the humility does run in, then the gratitude does run in, and then it's like, oh my God, this is overwhelming. And I think that's also why we also, you know, don't think about it or have created all these distortions as to, oh no, actually this is what we're meant to do. We're meant to dive into the cesspool of what we can conjure up and all the distortions of taboo and all these things and just play this whole weird game. When in reality, we're just denying the truth that we are, like you said, it's a very psychedelic reality. Like the truth is here. The truth is the ancestors are behind us. The future is in front of us. This legacy of honor and showing up and walking in a good way is so rich and so powerful, and it's such a full body, full life experience that it's like so immense that it's overwhelming. And I understand. And yet, if we don't actually foster that level of understanding, presence, and physicality to hold it and to understand it, then it will be something frightful. It will be something that people run away from. And especially if we don't reiterate it within society, then it's a weird thing. Then it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? But for me, that is the thing that just kind of topples the Jenga blocks down. And then all the minutia, all of a sudden are like, whoa, what the fuck was that dream? What were we doing? Because it's almost like we're trying to solve a problem in the waking world while we're still asleep in a dream. And I feel like the smelling salts to wake us up from that dream is like hey, you're in the, we wake up, like this is who we actually are. And then once we're actually awake from that, not woke, but awake, all of that stuff just seems like a bad memory or like a weird bad dream. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It does make sense to me. And what I think that you're touching on is the shift, right? It's like, how do people, I think even in this, in the mission of this podcast of like trying to understand like what creates a shift in someone? Why do people shift?
Yeah.
Why is it sometimes that the pain has to get so fucking bad that is the reason why we make a change in our life?
Yeah.
Right? There's a saying that sometimes the pain pushes to the vision pulls. And for a lot of people, that's when shift happens. It's when it becomes so uncomfortable to feel what we're feeling, to face the life that we've created for ourselves, and to be inside our own head, that then we create a shift. But it doesn't always have to be like that. Yeah. And I think that, like, I don't know, at least for me, it's like I did that. I went that route once, and then I'm choosing to like pay attention to the road signs. Yeah. So I don't have to go back to that place. Right. And yeah, I mean, it's like we can choose our own reality, and we also are living in a world of so much comfort. Yeah. And the societal framework, and don't get me wrong, like I'm not about to knock like capitalism or, the way that the world has evolved. Like there's always been commerce, there's always been trade. Right. No matter how far back you go in human history, that's always been there, so, but the trajectory that we're on right now, it's a constant seeking of more and more comfort. Yeah. And which is human nature. Which is human nature, because comfort, like run from pain, find the survival, right? This is how we evolved, to avoid those things, to avoid, the forest where the predators live or whatever. Right. So it's like a continual like hand-me-down from human evolution. But I think what we lost in a way as a human society is these cultural aspects of doing hard things. All right, everyone, we need to do hard things. That's it. We did it. Yeah, no, I feel you. Well, I guess what I'm really trying to get to is like, I agree though. Yeah. Is to continue the practice of doing things that are hard. And don't get me wrong, like maybe we should back up. I feel like this just took a turn, and I'm not trying to knock anybody or a culture, but it's like it comes back to the building of the faith piece, right? So I was talking about, to personalize it, I'll come back to me. Okay. It was good. Yeah. That should just be the tagline. Do hard stuff.
Do things that have merit. Yeah.
Do
and
things
value.
that like, it's like coming back to that concept of bravery. It's like bravery is not the absence of fear or feeling fear. It's like I am feeling all of the fear and I'm going to do it anyways.
Right. Exactly.
And
courage.
Andrew Huberman, people probably, whether they follow him or not, there's a reel that's going around right now where he talks about, there's actually something, he's a scientist, so it's all the scientific stuff of all the things that I feel like sometimes are known intuitively, but like there's this piece in our brain that when we do things we don't want to do, this thing in our brain, this muscle gets stronger. And so it's like in a world that is perpetuating comfort, that thing is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. So it's like, how do we reintroduce on a personal level for our own development of willpower, because to change it takes will, to change it takes courage, to change it takes bravery, because it's facing the things that are challenging to face. It's change is scary because we don't know what's on the other side. So it's like, are there practices that we can start to integrate into our daily lives, maybe into our family, maybe into our communities where we're training? It's this piece of like, we just keep doing it because we know it's good for us, not because we want to. There's a part of us that wants to do it, but at the same time, because we know it's like, this is where we need to be operating. But it's also from a place of like, man, I really don't want to get in this cold water. But I'm going to do it because I know that it's doing something good for my physical system. It's doing something for my spiritual system. I'm connecting back with an element. I'm watching this fear rush over in my mind, and I'm finding my center within it. And I'm not fighting the cold. Sometimes I go in and I'm like, oh, I'm fighting the cold, and I'm fighting what's happening. And then there's a piece of surrender where I'm merging with the cold. I'm coming back to this place where it's like, oh, actually, like in all of this turbulence, I can find my stillness. And that's strength. And I think that that's what some people probably find in meditation, where it's like, it's not coming into a place of passivity with life. I'm actually able to find my center in my calm, in the turbulence of the world, not escaping from the world, not retreating from life, not sitting in the safety of my living room in complete stillness in the forest. It's like I'm training, I'm practicing these things so that I can not be sitting on the banks of life afraid to get in the water, that I'm in the middle of that fucking river. And I'm scared. And yes, it's fucking awesome. And this is exactly where I want to be.
Oh, yes. In complete agreement to that. And I would say just side note, like I actually prefer to be in the turbulence in meditation. Like I love being at a dance event or being in the middle of just like chaos and busyness and finding that stillness. It's almost weird. I don't know. I prefer it over everything being still. I find that the silence is even more deafening, oddly enough. Anyways, aside from that, one of the things I also wanted to say is Huberman also talks about the dopamine, not just being like the happy drug, but being the progress chemical, right? So dopamine actually, like, and my coach was just explaining this to me. It's like especially for me as a creative and as someone who is consistently seeking progress, if I just have routine all day long and I'm not seeing progress, which is why it was important for me to actually put this out, because I had been working for like months and like, I'm like, nothing's happening. It's because like, we haven't put it out yet. We're stacking some things, we're making stuff happen. And yet not feeling like I'm making progress, my dopamine's just tanking. I'm not doing jujitsu, dopamine tanking, all these things. And so, like you said, we have to do things that are hard. We also have to do things that I'd say not only hard, things that are challenging, things where we can make progress. And what's interesting about this, when you say like we have to do these things and do them so that we get better, that all comes down to the philosophy of the specific culture itself. One specifically that I have my ethnic background attached to is in Japan. In Japan, for one, it's a collectivistic society. So there's no trash on the floor. People like followed the rules to a T. They got their shadows, but it's also like their shit works really well. And one of the things that happens as well, where they don't tip and they also just take pride in whatever they do. They could be a casino employee doing the pachinko thing. They could be an omelet maker. Their whole philosophy is you take pride in your work no matter what it is, and you keep honing it and you keep practicing your craft and you try to master it and be the best that you can be, which is something that we just don't have any strict inherent philosophy within America besides be free, do whatever the fuck you want. And now it's becoming be so obnoxiously arrogant as a means to try to boast your confidence, which is not confidence, it's insecurity. And it's just, obnoxiousness, right? As well as also show yourself in a means of insecurity and blatant expression as a means to show the extent of your freedom, which real freedom, real confidence is content and solemn. It is not boastful or arrogant, right? So when we see this hypersexualizing of individuals to be like, oh, this is me being empowered, is it? Or is being empowered knowing that you can do it without having to do it, right? Is doing the hard things, like you're saying, are the things that are actually worthy of value and merit and difficult, the things that don't need to be shown, that don't need to be represented in these glamorized ways? And I'd say the obvious answer is yes. But in a world where social media is everything,
is like what comes up for me when you say that, it's like, what do we do when nobody's watching?
Yeah.
It's like the work that we do in the dark.
Or does it matter if no one's watching? That's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah. Where people are sharing all these things of their best
Is it
life
even
or whatever.
worthy if not everyone's validating our experience and our progress? Like if we do not get that external validation, can we not receive that dopamine from within ourselves? And are we being almost like handicapped by it?
Well, bring it back to that was a new concept for me, the dopamine being a progress
chemical
or like a benchmark for progress.
Yeah, not just it's not just something that is dictated by happiness or joy, but also by progress, by being able to see that we are making progress, that we are bettering ourselves in whatever the thing it is that we're doing, right? So whether that's like, oh, I'm being a potter and I'm making better potter. Wow, I'm getting better. Oh, wow, look, I made this thing. That's not just happiness, right? Because I can make a whole bunch of pottery and be like, oh, yeah, I did great. Oh, I won this thing, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It's not the same as me getting better at something. That's a whole new
what I hear
type
in
of
that,
feeling.
and I don't know if this is what he or you are talking about, is is the new experience. So if we're living the mundane, it's like I'm getting better, and through that getting better, I'm having new experiences.
Yeah. One I think it's also showing that potentially doing, like you said, doing the hard things are actually in real time providing benefit and or like a very visual or real representation that things are shifting into something that would be closer to or on the trajectory to mastery and or to that space of like the divine. Like we're always seeking to perfection, right? And yet, do we ever get there? But if we're seeing that we're making progress towards betterment, that's it. You know what I mean? But what it takes to do that is to do the hard things, whether it's in our physical fitness, whether it's in our trade or our craft or our hobby or our profession, whatever it is, it's going to take us going outside the edges of being just the regular run-of-the-mill employee, of just doing the same old shit, of not taking any risks, of not doing the things that are challenging, hard, risky, scary, taking bravery and courage in order for us to actually make those strides in betterment, which would receive that dopamine, right? And so what's interesting is that if we're not making those strides and we're not getting that dopamine, then where else are we seeking it? Are we seeking it in porn? Are we seeking it in, I don't know what else people do to immediately alleviate themselves. I don't know, shop, Scroll, right? Yeah. These big surges to replace the thing because we're not doing the actual thing that, and also this ties into rites of passage. This ties into cultural relevance, all of it. So it runs deep, obviously. Yeah. And it's important. And one of the things that you do in regards to men's work and that you're still on your path with is holding these experiences of rites of passage. Yeah.
Initiations and rites of passage.
Yeah.
Yeah. What we call pattern disrupting experiences. So we're stepping out of the daily life, out of the normal patterns of wake up, have the coffee, get, whatever, jump in the shower, go to work, see the same people. We're disrupting all of those patterns. We're stepping out of the story to feel deeply, to explore our emotional range, to show up to life in a different way, to receive the support and the safety that we need to go to the places that we need to go to, and to come back different. So whether it's a 4-day men's weekend or deep nature immersion or other, it's like those spaces, disrupting the pattern, feeling the safety of the container, that there's capacity to receive what is going to come up. Because that's really important and valuable, to be in a space that has the capacity to receive the things that may be coming through. And then the courage to go there. Right. And that's the individual choice. Of course. And there's threshold experiences along that pathway and along that journey. It's the saying yes to show up to something like that. It's the actual action of not just, clicking yes on the computer, but then getting on the plane or getting in the car to go to the thing. Some men that's a whole nother experience for them of like, oh, I'm actually doing this. And then there's entering the container, and then everything that happens after that threshold point of entering the container and saying yes. And that's for me where I've felt immense amount of transformation. I spoke a little bit about therapy in the past and or in this podcast and about like only having a certain amount of time to really like drop in to those like deep spaces, and then having to kind of like suck it all back up, put myself back together, and
coming up,
and like going out. And by no means am I about to knock therapy, because it is such a powerful tool for so many people, and therapy has its place, and I support it 100%. And I think that there's a limitation to how deep someone can go within a therapy session. And so, and maybe not to compare it in terms of like depth, but there's just a range that can be explored in an hour and a half session, right? That is the capacity to explore the emotional range or the experiential range of our lives that is stored in our bodies. The capacity is greatly grown when we're in a container for multiple days, and we're able to take people through or guide them through an architectural journey that allows them to feel the safety, feel the connection, feel the capacity, and then hold space for them to go there if they want to go there.
Bro, 100%. And a really big, for one, I love that you brought up this topic, because I've talked about therapy in a bunch of these other podcasts, because it's been really revolutionary for me. And also, it is not the same thing. And one of the things that I've said, which I'd love to share with you, that excites me to be able to share, is just kind of like a analogy or like a visual metaphor. I don't know what the fuck to call it. Anyways, visual representation of what I feel like therapy is and what Sacred Sons or these circles can be with the full release, right? Like for instance, for me, I'm not the type of individual where I have a bunch of bros who I could call and be like, bro, this is happening, or like, can I vent to you, or blah, blah. I don't like that. For me personally, when I like calling my bros, it makes me happy to be able to be like, yo, what's up, my dude? Like, blah, 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 and be that guy, right? Not to dump onto them. Because for me, sometimes it's just, for one, I don't even want to have their subjective opinion, right? Coming from their lens. I kind of want someone objective, for one. Someone who's not going to judge me on what I'm doing, what I'm saying, or also like have to hold this, right?
Or can I offer something as well? Maybe that isn't in your social circle, so you don't have to show up or see them at a birthday party or at the supermarket or at the potluck that you're having at your house next week. And so there's some level of like anonymity there too.
There's complete anonymity, and there's also like, once again, not that. As men especially, we like to try to like fix, right? So there's going to be like, oh, bro, why don't you do this? Or there might be that. Or there might be like, oh, well, I know what they should be doing, or blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, okay. So for me, having therapy has been great. It helped me to be able to learn how to hold boundaries in regards to, separating from my relationship of 10 years. It's helped me keep that. It's helped me to work on just like who I'm becoming as this person who hasn't been single since they've been 23. You know what I mean? And then building all of this, that we're doing right now, and all of the scary things and stuff. Because when I'm with my coach, I'm there to get to work. What can I be accountable for? Where are my blind spots? Let's go. But Sean's heart, that's there for me to empty my cup enough. And what I would say Sacred Sons is having a whole bunch of bros, and you have this cup that's full and there's sediment at the bottom. And there's all this stuff that has just not been completely emptied. And you got a bunch of bros that are like, we got you, bro. And they're helping you fully empty that cup. And one of them's got a hose and they're like spraying the bottom of the cup. There's all this gunk that's been there forever because we've never, ever, in order to lift that cup, even when we're in the car and we're going, screaming, crying, the cup's like this. It's never like this. No one's ever spraying the bottom of that shit and being like, yo, fully empty it out because we got you here. We're the ones helping you to go there, which is like honestly a space where if you don't have that support, like I've had my first event, I had like guys holding me as I'm just fucking a raging demon dragon just of so much pain. I would never, and they're all crying and screaming with me. I would never have ever gone there by myself. It's almost like, it's like a spirit bomb. It's like all the powers combined, like all these people helping you, these bros loving you and tapping into that in order for you to fully release and just like empty the vessel. Whereas for therapy, what I find is interesting because some of my bros, and I've recommended them, like, BetterHelp, bro, $200 a month, like 40-minute sessions or 45-minute sessions a week, like blah, blah, blah. Do it so that you can be in good relationship with yourself, good relationship with your family, good relationship with your bros. Because what I've correlated it with is like, because like I said, I won't reach out to bros most times, oftentimes, because I feel like my cup is like overflowing and it's full and I'm just shaking and it's just spilling everywhere. And I'm like, I do not want to get their shirt all wet with this Hawaiian punch right now. You know what I mean? And then
so it sounds like there's a fear of this thing spilling on other people and affecting them in a negative way.
Well, it will. And they're so loving that they'll be like, it's all good, bro. I'll do laundry. But it's like, yeah, and instead of me spilling it on your shirt, I can go over to here to this therapist who has a big bowl and is like, hey, I'm here for this. Here you go. Empty that here as much as you can during this time that we have. Okay, cool. Now go to your friends. And I still got some in that cup, but I'm not shaking all over the place with them. And I'm like, hey, bro, what's up? Yeah, I'm going through this, blah, blah, blah. But, like, I'm working through it. Just weekly having that type of touch point and being able to just empty it out a little bit until hopefully the individual is able to go to an experience, a threshold experience where they're able to fully have support in emptying that cup is so important because so many people like my bros and like me will have that cup shaking for weeks, months, years at a time. Their physical body disintegrates. Everything disintegrates. They get sick. Who knows? But it's like, yo, I know you don't want to, like, you're not answering my calls because it's not that you don't want to talk to me. It's that you're spilling everywhere. You can't even connect with me because this is all that's present. So have the receptacle so you can just offload a little bit so that then when I call, you're like, hey, bro, how you doing? Because that's not all that's there. And I don't know if that's true, but for me, it's very true. And I can only project that it's true for a lot of my bros who are very similar,
Yeah. Yeah, that therapy acts as this touch point place to have a space to relieve some of that pressure valve and then allow, what I think I'm hearing is like allow you to then be fully present with people in your community, people in your friend circle, and to not feel like you have it all bottled up and it's right about here, about to come out of your ears.
Yeah. 100%. Because like I've been at times when, someone calls or something like that, and I'm like, I love this person. I'm not even in the headspace to be able to talk to them because I can't even handle life right now. And so if we can't handle life, it's like, if I were to talk to them, I'd be like, hey bro, I can't even match you right now. I'm not happy. I don't know. And unless that's the type of relationship we have, and if I want to shift the dynamic to that way, or maybe I don't even think that maybe they have the tools to be able to process that or
to
hold
be
that.
in that space to
right. Because it is,
hold it.
The reason why, the sons and stuff, like it's a container that has to be delicately held, just like therapy has to be delicately held. It's because like holding space to this extent is not just like, oh yeah, just lay it on. It's like, no, it's not that. There's a specific way. And I feel like a lot of that, like how we talked about earlier, a lot of it comes from having relation, right? Relation to pain, relation to grief. And that's why for pretty much all of us who have been through these experiences with Sacred Sons, we become very fast friends, but brothers, people in leagues, in arms, because it's like whoa, you've been there. And it's not like oh, hey, have you had it? Like, you can feel it. And it gets to the point where you're like, you're not worried about being able to like keep them accountable too, because you know that they can handle it. It's different.
Yeah, it is different. I think that, I think what you're touching on, for me, what comes up when you share that is that is like this key touch point of embodiment, where it's like, and leadership, where it's like, I can be there with somebody else because I've been there myself. I can only take people as far as I've gone. And so I'm in deep relationship with my grief, with the celebration of my triumphs, and everything in between, with my anger, my rage, and how I'm able to alchemize my rage into fuel for other things that fill my heart up, right? So it's like all these things, and then understanding the dynamics of like the masculine archetypes and how certain things show up. So it's like, it's an incredible, it's like an incredible, I don't know why the word gauntlet wants to come through, but it's like, it's a gauntlet of like, of things that we've gone through in our own personal journey, but also work that we've done in the presence and support of a circle, whether it's Sacred Sons or other groups, because there are other groups and people that have the capacity to hold containers that are similar to the ones that we're referencing. And to be able to find those places and to find those deep levels of trust, and that deep level of trust and knowing that like the men around me or the people around me are also on a similar journey of being in deep relationship with all of their parts. One of the things that we sometimes say in these spaces is all of you is welcome. And it's true. Every single fragmented piece of me is welcome in that space, and same with you. And I think that is, I think there's different passages in my, whatever word you want to throw on it, spiritual process, self-awareness process, personal growth process. But like, for me, this is where it all starts to really come together and build on a foundation that brings me into deeper intimacy with myself. And then I can hold that intimacy with other people, bring it to my partnership. It's just like the ripple effect of this work it's kind of hard to fathom sometimes.
It is. And what I would say, tying it back to personal agency, personal responsibility, like feeling the magnitude of what we are, who we are, the power that we hold, and having owning that responsibility. I feel like that's at the core of it, because like ultimately, if you don't choose in the moment, in every moment, or at least choose to practice or choose to intentionally try to practice, reminding yourself and choosing in every moment that I have the capacity to change how I'm perceiving this and then respond accordingly in a way that is honorable, reverent, and so forth. And why would I do that? Because I actually have a responsibility to my ancestors, to my legacy going forward, as well as just the fact that I'm here right now and the gratitude for the finite existence that I hold, and then I'm going to make this count. All of those things crescendoing into, okay, I have the choice right now to create this as I see fit, and I'm going to choose the best way that I can. And I might be challenging and I might not do it perfectly. I probably won't do it perfectly. And yet, based on all of those things, the grief, the humility, the gratitude, all the things that were listed, that's why I'm doing it. Because and that's really important to me to pinpoint, in that when we talk about personal agency, when we talk about creating our reality, when we talk about all these things, I feel like at the end of the day, some people might hear this and be like, ancestors, well, I don't connect with that. Or, legacy, I don't care about my great-great-great-great-grandchildren, or I don't care about the world after I'm dead, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, cool. Obviously, there's something cut off there, right? There's a disconnect. It's a lot for people to fathom. It's psychedelic in a way, right? All of that might be too much for people to understand. And so what is the thing? What is the gut punch that allows for the person to, oh man, whoa, I'm knocked out of whatever delusion of who I am and lack of worth and lack of responsibility. Oh, okay, I get it now. What is that thing? Like the big question is, what is that thing? What is the gut punch that allows for the individuals to actually care, to have that responsibility? And that's been the thing that really drives me, and the one secret sauce component that I think, at least, not that I have, but that I feel like I'm not just the same broken record of personal development people, which is like, be more, you deserve it, you're worthy, keep reaffirming that you're worthy, keep the mantras. I'm not saying any of that's bad, right? And at the same time, for me, the big thing is the thing in the back of my head is why. Like, the part of me wants to be like, I don't want to listen to you, right? And so how does that voice be squelched? How does that voice be just like, put out, right? Out of the equation. And I don't feel that it is because it's the better thing to do, or it's the, whatever thing to do. The whatever thing to do. That it's like, oh, you should do it, like shooting on people. I don't think any of that works. And like I said, I don't think the ancestors, the future legacy thing is enough for people, especially normal people in this world who are just worrying about all sorts of things of validating their self-worth and so forth. The thing that I think cuts it all down, that literally cuts these curtains behind me, and then it's like, oh shit, we're actually able to see the ocean over there, is that you are God's child. God wants the same for you. Creator wants the same for you. Whatever word you use for God wants the same for you as you want for your own children. And unless you're a person with some really fucked up shit, you want your children to be more. You want them to be loved. You want them to be the expression and the evolution of you. You want them to have a better life. And so because of that, not only is that wanted of you, but it's also, to an extent, expected of you, in the sense of like, you have this power to then do with what you will. And with that, and we talk about it as free will, blah, blah, but everyone throws out free will like, oh, free will, whatever. I can fucking, put ice cream on my belly. I don't know, some fucking crazy shit. Point is, we have the capacity, like we said, to create the reality to a certain extent. We have the capacity to do all these things. And unless that is really put forth in a wider context, I'm talking about to the masses, and we're able to, in whatever form or fashion that is, whatever crescendo and uprising that is, to be able to be like, hey guys, this is what we're going to decide to make mainstream now. That's my goal, because that's the only thing that I think can then bring about this, these topics in regards to men's work to a more widespread place, in the sense that it becomes normalcy, right? All of these things because a lot of the stuff that we do in men's work takes personal agency. It takes understanding these topics of reality creation. It's the same thing, but it's like, once again, for the people who haven't gotten there, or for the masses of people who are somewhat asleep, like, what is the boom bang thing outside of personal tragedy that allows for them to wake up? And the only thing that I can think of, and I'm curious about your stance on this, the only thing that I can think of to wake individuals up in a mass scale to understanding why they have a responsibility is that they have a responsibility to be more, to be great. That actually the false narrative of being less than and the victim narrative is actually just been a cop-out of the true extent of their being. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
There's some layers there.
Yeah.
And there's also some words that were used that I feel like it depends on how they're being defined in the way that you're using them. Like responsibility, I think some people, when they hear the word responsibility, are like, oh, I don't want more responsibility. I got enough responsibility on my plate, right? Yeah. So, but then I think what I think I'm hearing you say is like responsibility in the context of like taking responsibility for the life that I'm creating and the way that I'm relating to things and how that is spiraling and co-creating around me to create the reality that I'm in. Is that more?
I'd say yes, and also that even if we choose not to own up to the grandiose responsibility of being more and who we are, and basically surpassing in a place of honor of our predecessors, even if we don't choose that, to acknowledge that we are still so powerful in that we're making that choice, right? It's like empowering to even make the lesser choice by still acknowledging that we're making the choice, which is kind of a conundrum. But do you get what I'm saying?
I think what you're talking about is to be engaged with life.
not only to be engaged with it, but to understand, like, even if I'm going to choose to be, there's a difference between someone unconsciously or subconsciously choosing the narrative of the victim, to choose to be less than, to do all these things, and then to just be reaffirmed by society that that's all that they can do and that they are powerless. It's very different than a society that engages and puts forth the narrative that we are all choosing, and that it is like there's no like, hey, you have to be more, you have to be great, but that like you are destined for that and you can choose otherwise. Ultimately, you're making the choice, right? Neutral. And then if the individual is to be like, you know what, I want to choose the lesser, I want to choose the less than, because I want to experience that, entirely different, right?
It's like the red pill, blue pill thing.
It is. And yet the funny thing is, you, even in the, what's the one that makes you wake up? The blue pill?
I think so.
All right, whichever one. Most people will choose to be the victim, right? And will they choose to be the victim if they know that they're choosing and it's made commonplace within society? I don't know, but the point is that that's still very different than pretending that we all don't have a choice and pretending that we're all supposed to be less than, because that's just annoying.
Yeah, I think what you're touching on, or what comes up for me when you share that, is we're talking about steps, right? Steps in evolution. And I think that part of that process is being able to put power back where power belongs. It's about returning to our power centers. And so when we return to our power centers, then we're able to be in a place of agency. And then from that place, we can make choices that are in line or aligned with our purpose, with our integrity. But if our energy centers and we're not put together, we don't have a good foundation, then we're in a place of constant trauma response. We're in a place of being hijacked in our emotional processes in response to things. And so it's like, I think in someone's personal process, however they can, and I don't think it's the same for everyone.
Agreed.
because I think that like we've seen the holes in guruism, right?
100%.
Everybody's path is individual.
Yeah.
There's no secret sauce. There's no like personal recipe that's going to work for everyone.
No. And
what works for someone is it's going to be totally different. So like, and that's also the beauty of it. There's diversity.
Yeah.
And that's also the power in some of our personal stories. And I think that's also why podcasting and the sharing of stories has made a resurgence in our culture in a very authentic and kind of off the cuff way.
Totally. Yeah.
Because we're bringing storytelling back into our culture.
Yeah.
So, but to come back to like, that aha moment or the gut punch or that moment of catalyst where something shifts, there's the shift and then there's the work afterwards, right? So for me, what comes up is like, there's an acknowledgement, whether it comes through an invitation or someone being so present and loving in a moment of my vulnerability. I'm realizing that something else, a different operating system is possible. And somebody else often needs to show that to me, because if it's not shown and I don't see it or I'm not exposed to it, it's like we're products of our environment. So if like,
True.
You know, it's like if we don't have access to it, if we don't have the ability to see a different way, some people imagine a different way, and that can be a starting point too, that there's got to be a different way that I can be or the world can be. And it comes from a place of imagination. It also can come in the place of dreams. People starting to tune into their dreams and ancestors or other ways of operating or being or ceremonies or connecting can come through the medium of dreams. So I don't think that there's one particular way. I think that there's like actually probably infinite ways that somebody can begin to shift to realize that another way is possible. But then there's the work, right? So then there's like the work of like facing the things that we need to face, putting power back where power belongs. Victim is a really interesting concept and a place that is very layered. But when we and victim operates in a place of like right and wrong, or someone wronged somebody else, and there is blame and responsibility, and sometimes people exploit that they use it for actual power. They exploit 100%. The victim place to be in a place of power, but in my opinion, it's not true power. There are definitely people on this planet that have extreme adverse things against them. And I don't believe in like the purity culture of like, oh, you can just choose your own reality in a blink of an eye tomorrow.
No.
And like, we're meant to be on this planet to just be happy all the time. I think we're here to experience a complete range of emotions. We're here to experience a complete range of experiences and to feel all of life, and to be able to have the capacity to hold all of life. But to come back to this like foundational shift, I think it's about putting power back where power belongs, and then building the foundation to be able to be responsible, to take on more responsibility, because most people, I don't want to project, a lot of people are feeling like they're just keeping their head above water. Agreed. So to get back to a place where there's actually resourcing happening, where I feel resourced, that person feels resourced, and then from a place of being resourced to be able to shift and make changes in their life.
Agreed. I would say I definitely agree with the people having their head above water analogy. That's kind of why I ask, what is the gut punch? And when I speak about the gut punch, I know that, for one, we cannot save everyone. It's futile to try to save everyone. We also, to clarify, there will and always be victims of circumstance, right? Being a victim of circumstance and choosing to own being a victim as your narrative, and then also to use it as power play in order to, have a sense of like vampiric power, and or just to provide a cop out for choosing to own your part in your reality creation. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about victimhood, to clarify. But when I talk about the gut punch, what I'm more specifically wondering is, when it comes to personal development, there will be individuals who are just like, fuck that, or like, whatever, like, what's the point, right? And people just holding their head above water, all these things. For me, I'm not saying that everyone's experience towards ascending out of victimhood and coming to a space of sovereignty will be the same. It absolutely won't. And most people will have to go through this whole hero's journey, or whatever we want to call it, this whole like tragedy, and maybe they'll never get there. Maybe it ends with the conclusion of their life and they never get to fully wake up from their own misery story that they're creating. And I'm okay with that, because I don't have no control over that. But what does light me up, and what does compel me to do this and to speak out about these things, and what I'm, at least for me, what I find to be the gut punch is the understanding of the divine parent. Because for me, that kind of flipped things upside down for me. I'm like, oh shit, wait, hold on. Instead of me being blasphemous for wanting to be more than my divine parent, or feeling that that's what my parent would want, like if I correlate it with a human parent and then make it analogous to my divine parent, oh shit, yeah, why would my divine parent want less than a human parent, right? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so if it's correlated, that means I have a big responsibility to be more. And for me, that's the gut punch. But I also wonder what's the gut punch for you or for someone else, or what you think would be a gut punch for people. Because all these things, we have so much depth. We've cultivated character through all of the challenge and adversity. We've cultivated character through the struggle and the suffering, and come out the other side. For those who are in the midst of it, and or maybe they've lived a life that's like somewhat mundane, right? And for someone to choose who maybe has their head above water, they're just like, I'm just comfortable treading. I'm comfortable in the normalcy. Okay, cool. What is the thing to be like, cool, keep choosing normalcy, and I just want to make you aware that this is the way that we are choosing our story. And if you want to keep choosing that, I honor you in that. Please do whatever you want to do. I have no control over that. You are your own sovereign being. Full respect and honor to whatever you choose. And this is why you're choosing. And this is also, this is the new reality that we're putting forth, is that we do have a responsibility to be great. And whether you choose that, that's your own path. And we're getting rid of, we're disposing of the old narrative where we're less than, and that it's actually normalcy to be less than, and it's normalcy to be the victim, and it's normalcy to be dishonorable and all these things. You know what I mean? And I'm wondering, for me, that's the gut punch. But what would you find to be the gut punch that, and maybe you can use a better word than gut punch, but what would be that thing that just allows for the value to be there, or immediately creates that switch where there is value there, where for most people there would be none?
When you share those words, for me, you're in a way touching on freedom and it's like, what do people do with freedom? You know, it's like, do they choose escape and they go into, you know, chasing drugs or, you know, something other, sexual addiction or whatever? It's like, do they choose that, or do they choose to create a different way of being, or to remember an old way of being, or to just to be different, right?
Yeah.
So I can only reflect on my personal path and what's present for me, and all of the experiences that have accumulated and amalgamated into who I am sitting in front of you today has brought me to a place of relating to time differently. And we touched on this earlier around ancestry. I am feeling my ancestors so close, and I'm actively feeding my relationship with them and nurturing my relationship so that I can hear more, so I can feel more. And I feel that one of my purposes in my life is to do what I can to relieve some of that ancestral pressure, whether you want to call it pressure, cycle breaking, trauma, whatever, to process things that are theirs in my life, to also get clear with myself in my life. And so, and with that, my prayer is to create a better place, and to create different ways of relating to themselves and to the world of my future generations. And I think that, like, part of the question is also about capacity. Like it's taken me a long time to get to that place where I actually have the capacity to feel into those concepts,
Right.
and the capacity then to hold the responsibility that comes with.
Yeah.
And it's something that Kale talks about, shout out to Kale, about the beautiful burden.
Yep.
And it's like, when we come into a place of service, we're also taking on an immense amount of responsibility. When we step into leadership, we're taking on responsibility. When we step into taking ownership over our own lives and our own feelings and all of the bodies that make up our human energy system, it's like that all is a constant process of expanding capacity for responsibility, which in some cases feels heavy.
Yeah.
And there's grief there.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what is the beautiful burden. It's like I'm being in service, and sometimes it feels heavy, and sometimes it feels like I'm pushing a rock uphill, a giant boulder uphill. But it's like, this is the work that I'm able to do in my lifetime, so I will do it.
Right. And so in relation to the question, do you feel like it's a question that you can then only relate to just your own experience? Is that basically your answer?
I mean, it's a difficult place for me to be, because I don't want to project and to create stories about other people, but like,
yeah, it's just more of like a hypothetical. Like, you know, there's no wrong answers. It's just out of curiosity, because I know what it is for me. I know what makes sense for me, but you're a whole nother being. So I'm curious as to, if you were, in a hypothetical sense, to try to conjure up something that made sense within your realm of being and everything you've experienced, what would be the thing that enables for the individuals who have no value in the things that you find valuable because of the experiences that you've had? How would personal responsibility and there's responsibility of being more and being great that is attached to personal agency, and the ability, the understanding and acceptance of being attached to creator. How could you provide value to someone who is not of that world? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, for me, the way that I relate to the question is like, I'm not saying that this is what you're asking me, but I'm not trying to take people and make them Jordans. When I work with people, it's more about creating a space that holds them in their journey to where they want to be, and I don't really have an attachment to who they are on the when they leave a weekend, for example. It's not my responsibility to like take them and to make them go somewhere. I'm just holding a space, and there's invitations and offerings. And so it's to that person's individual agency to dive in the deep end, to slowly walk in the shallow end. And however they do that, that's totally fine. But I'm not coming from a place of saving, or coming from a place of like, this is the template, or this is how you get from point A to point B, because every journey is totally different. Yeah. And that's the diversity of life. And I think that that's what makes life beautiful. And I'm also not trying to wake anybody up that doesn't want to be woken up. Like, that's okay too. You know what I mean? And and cicadas stay buried in the earth for like 17 years or something crazy like that. Yep. And then they emerge they just emerge and they're fascinating creatures, and they make sound decibels that are wild for how small they are. So it's like,
and everything eats them. It gives a whole boost for the ecosystem.
So it's like, I'm not in a place where I'm not wanting to knock. I'm not here with my hammer cracking people's shells and like,
of course
opening them up. So it's like, it's just like,
and at the same time, that does happen there.
I think that it's in the way that I can relate to your question. I think it's about exposure. I think that that's the power in storytelling. I think that that's power in documentaries like The Work, or, visual storytelling through, a huge medium of that right now is Instagram and other aspects of online viewership, where people get to have a window into like, wow, people are doing that. Wow. Right. That's actually happening. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's like, I didn't even know.
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was places like that.
That's a great answer in itself. Just being able to see.
That guy, I can relate to that guy. He kind of looks like me, or I feel like maybe we have something in common, and he's doing this, he's going to this emotional place that, fuck, I need that medicine. Right. I need to go there. Right. I need to find that.
When you're specifically talking about men's work. But I'm talking
and that's
about
just one example. Yeah. But it's like, and not all men will make their way to men's work, maybe because that doesn't call them, or that's not part of their path, and that's okay. I'm trying to answer your question, but like, I feel like it's totally different for every single person. And I think it also comes back to capacity, like somebody's ability to.
So you can also, to be succinct, you can also say that you don't think that there is a thing, right?
I think it can be a dream. I think that it can be an invitation. I think that
but what I'm saying,
it can be the value.
I'm not saying all the things that it could be. I'm saying, is there a soul gut punch? And if you don't feel there is a soul gut punch, that's what I want to know. And if you do feel like there is a correlated gut punch, because the correlated gut punch that I feel is that if we allow for ourselves to correlate what we want for our children with what our divine parent wants for us, everything gets flipped upside down.
What I would say is I think the through line is expanding the depth of the human experience. I think that is the thing that allows people to want to feel more. And if it's held in a space where like there is a level of safety, like safety is important, but there's always like vulnerability in the essence of its definition in word, in the essence of the definition of the word, there is a certain level of danger. That's why people are afraid to be vulnerable. We don't know how something's going to turn out. So like within the safety, there's also vulnerability, there's courage, there's an element of danger. But if we can invite people into I just think it comes back to like exposure and realizing that like life can be more. Life can be more than just like TV dinners and Netflix.
I agree. I'd say that if we don't know, we're in oblivion. We're not in ignorance, right? Because you have to know what to ignore in order to ignore it. So being in oblivion, you just don't know. Like a lot of, there's so many levels of human consciousness where there's people who are like, TV dinners and watching reality shows or whatever it is, Kardashians is like all they know. And there's like, I'm operating here. I guess my question is not only like, like, I guess that's always a step.
And maybe they
you know?
also authentically like it because TV dinners remind them of like hanging out with their
100%.
grandfather or whatever.
Comfortability.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once again, I'm not saying, to reiterate, I'm not trying to save people from their own choices. My goal is that what I find to be extremely wildly dangerous, irresponsible, and something that I feel a need to rectify for the honor of my ancestry and for the generations to come, is this perpetuating this narrative of being less than, which in my opinion is a blasphemy and a dishonoring of the sovereign and the sacredness of the divinity that we all hold. And so for me, what I'm asking is, what is the thing? And for me, this, like I said, is what it is. It's like flipping the script of the unworthy original sinner, the person who is worthy of less. Don't ever try to be more because how dare you type of thing, as opposed to flipping the script and you're actually meant for more. And if you choose not to, you're that powerful that you can choose that, but you're still choosing it. And that's your power. That's the gut punch for me. And I don't know if there's another gut punch. And I know that it's going to be the same for everyone. I was just curious in the sense that, like, I don't know what I don't know until I know it. You know what I mean? And if there isn't anything there, that's cool. And I'll just keep, because for me, I know that for my life, every freaking like 3-5 years, I'm like, what the fuck was I thinking? So I'm really curious being in this space where I feel so firm and grounded in this knowingness of like, wow, okay, this is what I'm being called for. Is it going to shift? Maybe, maybe not. And maybe there's something or someone will be on this podcast and just make me be like, whoa, oh, I've awakened a level deeper, right? Or maybe this is there and now it's just the building time. Who knows? I'm keeping myself in the space where I'm like, okay, this is not the Sean Show. This is the everyone. This is the Magnanimous collective. I'm part of a collective. I am not you know what I mean? And so with that, I humbly am curious. And also, I'm also in agreement with everything you're saying, because when it comes to people awakening from them like a lot of times these men come to these weekends and they don't even know what it is, because the women have seen it and been like, whoa, I didn't even know men could be like this. So I'm sending my man, or the men make their own decisions. And that's also why media is so important as well, which Sacred Sons appreciate your media more. But yes, 100%.
And through some of, and it's interesting because historically in some of these containers, it's like cameras don't go there. And I think,
agreed.
I think that
like we were talking about with Temescal and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier
with
our brother Vince about like, in some spaces cameras aren't allowed. And I deeply appreciate like holding the sanctity of a certain space without the viewership, because cameras are like a portal, right? It's like somebody's able to see through this thing into what happened in that moment.
Yeah.
And so there's a level of viewership or a portal out to something outside of the container. So it could be perceived as like a hole in the container.
Right.
And so like, but if it's held in a good way, and there's consent obviously in the container, it can also create through the dissemination of that media, create more normalcy in our culture to see men in that way, to see men, oh wow, like men are being emotional and they're going to those places. I've never been to that place. And that's what like my little boy in me needs to be able to like express, you know, it's frustration, hurt, pain, guilt, judgment from the fucked up thing that happened when I was a kid, and it needs an out, whatever. And so so I think that there's power in that. And again, for me, it just comes back to like exposure to other ways of being. And I think that like, for me, it's been a process of being really curious and to even in the face of some anxiety or resistance or fear, to be like, you know what? I think I'm going to show up to that thing. I think I'm going to go there. I'm at least going to bring myself there and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and it comes from a place of like, well, because I'm worth it. You know, I think self-worth is a big piece in what you're sharing about empowerment and stepping out of victim. And it's like, you know, I think so many people have deep, deep wounds around worth, myself included. I've had big breakthroughs in those pieces, and it's like the worthiness or the understanding that, there's the concept of like, I can do more, I can be more, I can have a more online human operating system.
Yeah.
And operate at a higher capacity. But then there's like the worthiness piece, and how does that work? Or how will people perceive me if I'm doing that thing or making that money, or I'm talking about this thing on a podcast, or I'm showing it on Instagram, or, whatever it is, I'm following that dream, that passion. I'm stepping in more into life. There's a piece around worthiness. And there's I think a big, what's related to that are big pieces around fear of leaving people behind, fear of change, fear of all these different things, judgments, belonging.
Yeah.
So it's layered and complex, just like all humans.
Yeah.
And for me, there is no like, this is the thing, or I don't necessarily think that people wake up with a gut punch or a peak experience. It can be in the soft subtleties of being present and listening to the wind.
Oh, yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Tasting fruit after sweat lodge or something. Like, it could be the most minute things. It could be watching ants going up a tree. It could be any of that. And I love that you brought up worth, because that's the one piece that maybe I didn't fully touch on in regards to this gut punch thing that I'm talking about, is that worth is always the thing. Everything always comes down to individuals' worth. Whether it's like in hypnotherapy or all these things, I've seen it time and time again. Everything gets deduced down to worth. Oh, people aren't going to think I'm worthy. Like, I'm going to embarrass my friends. I'm going to embarrass my family. This or that, blah, blah, blah. What does that mean? I'm not worthy, right? What's the core wounding that is causing individuals to not feel worthy? Is it dogmatic religious beliefs that have been passed on through epigenetics and ancestral trauma? Is it the way that we were spliced way back in the day? Is it part of our genetic code just inherently? I don't know. But that's my point in regards to the gut punch, is for me, what I was saying earlier, the affirmations of I am worthy, I'm worthy of this. It's like, okay, we can try to tell ourselves that, but if the core wound and the core belief still exists, then it's just us trying to patch over like a tire that's consistently, or like an inner tube that's consistently leaking out air, and we're trying to blow it up. For me, when it comes to the divine parent analogy, if we actually switch the script of not being less than and being expected to be more, it's not just expected to be more. It's that we are so incredibly worthy that we then have the responsibility. And for me, that is the thing, is it all comes down, and thank you for bringing it up, because that's the thing. It all comes down to, how do we solidify the worth? How do we make the worth not even a doubt, but actually so immense that, it's overwhelming. And that, then that responsibility is so great. No wonder we chose this fake narrative of being less than, because it's scary. Because it's a lot to live up to. And whether or not we live up to it, fine. But like, fuck this stupid like script where we're not worthy, because it's not true.
Yeah, I think that there's also like the duality of you're touching and focusing a lot on the less than piece. But what I see is like, in our culture, in American culture or Western culture, is there's the less than, and then there's like the shadow side of that, which is then dominance. And so it's like there's people that feel less than, and then there's like, it comes out sideways because now there's domination, and there's I'm more important than this thing. I'm more important than this other person. And so, I think that.
Well, and that's still being less than and over-exaggerating the need to try to fulfill that worth in a way that comes out sideways. Yeah. But it still always correlates to, I'm not deserving, and then I either underperform or I overperform to try to satisfy the need, which is never satisfied because my core wound is that I'm unworthy. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, I mean, for what comes up for me and what you're sharing in terms of like root cause, I mean, again, this is just what comes up for me, but it's colonization. I mean, like, so many cultures have been colonized by other dominant cultures. Yeah. And there's this piece of like deep, and I'll speak about it in my own family, like deep wounds of embarrassment, of being less than, of being degraded, ostracized, and made less than to be a second-class citizen. And that story and that pain is passed on. And I think that
Agreed.
a lot of people on this planet are in the process of reclaiming that power because it's time. Because it's time.
Well, okay. Yes, I agree. And what we're talking about there with time, that's kind of like the gut punch, right? And then why is it time?
Because it's time.
I know.
The time is now.
The time is now.
The time is now. No, but seriously, like we're smiling about it, but
no, but I'm asking seriously though, because when you say it's time, that's some people would agree and some people would be like, what are you talking about? And that's why I'm asking sincerely, like, why? Why is it time? Like that, I'm playing devil's advocate because for me, in order for me to rectify within myself the doubtful nature or the one who wants to make things concrete so that it's foolproof, essentially evidential, why is it time? If you and I weren't aligned, why do I feel it's time? Why now? Aside from
why not?
Answer. Like imagine I gave all these answers. That just creating the counter argument to the thing doesn't then prove the original thing. I'm not saying you have to have that, but I'm also curious, like, because I agree, which is why we're doing this.
Yeah.
And why? Why now? I know. I'm sorry,
Sean.
No, but I am sincerely curious as to. Because with me, it's always about impact, right? Like if we do this and we don't have impact, I've been the preacher to the choir. I've been that guy. I was Ptolemaic the Master. I was like a music guy, and I performed to the people who already knew what I was talking about. And then it's what I find that we can get really stoked about, like getting riled up, personal development. We can be like, it's time, let's do this, da. And then that like will fade for most of us. We go back into our mundanity of life, into the patterns and into the things. We can even pattern disrupt it a weekend and then people fall right back into their things, right? They can go to multiple events, keep going back into it. And so that's my thing when we talk about the gut punch is like, it's time, or the pattern disrupting and all the things only go as far as they're present with us and as present with us as they are within our surroundings, right? Unless there is that thing that carries forward. And so what is that thing that allows for us to carry it all the time in our pocket, in our heart, where it's just like it never leaves us and we're just reminded in every moment like it's time?
I think it just comes back to there is a collective energy when people when there's like a collective uprising or movement that happens. And I think it happens on an individual level. Again, I always bring it back to me and what I've felt and what I've experienced. And I do also believe in collective energy. And so like as certain things start to come online around the world or across cultures, it's like there's that, whatever that saying is, like the 100th monkey or whatever. It's like the critical mass piece where it's all these pieces are coming online and it's individual until it becomes collective.
Right. Like the monkeys in Japan you're talking about, right? The sweet potatoes and stuff.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
The 100th monkey. It's like the critical mass thing. It's
yeah. Similar. I don't know if it's the same thing, but.
Yeah, I think that, I can like rationalize why I think it's time, but more than anything else for me, it's a feeling. And I think it's also coming through me because I have grown the capacity to receive it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about the rational part though? I'm curious.
The rational can say things like, we're in a pivotal moment in time where the elders that are alive today are still alive to be able to bridge and to remind us of the old ways. And they're we talked a lot about it, the new way of being, but also it's like the new old way. So it's like they are the bridges. When I used to sit and I used to listen to my grandmother, I used to feel like there was a library with inside her. She would tell stories about like how my grandfather's first job was delivering coal by horse and buggy.
Yeah.
And like to people's houses, and now like I'm talking to my grandmother when she was still alive through a video phone. You know, it's like they are a bridge in time. And so we're at a moment in time where there are still people that know the old ways, that remember the old ways, that can remind us of the old ways, that are still here to bridge that forth. There's fewer and fewer people as time goes on to learn the old ways. That is an incredible commitment that some individuals take on to step away from the modern life to go back and to learn the old ways. It takes a long, it's a lifetime work. And even if someone works at it for their entire life, they're only going to get a fraction of what that elder had or what that elder experienced. So it's like, for me, that's a big rational piece of like, we are still hearing the stories of from the people who experienced the old ways and have experienced some of the traumas of the new ways of being, of like the dominant culture in society. Yeah. And we're in danger of losing that. And we're also on the cusp of cultural extinction. So I studied ecology. And we've all heard stories of like, you know, animals or plant species going extinct, and how conservation works to create intact ecosystems that are healthy enough to perpetuate and to maintain life in the abundance that it once was, or to restore it back to a touch point in time where it once was. Right. From my understanding of where we're at culturally through literature that I've read and through the teachings of people like Wade Davis, who's a cultural anthropologist and ethnobotanist, he says that we are on the brink of like 50% of the world's languages are on the verge of extinction. Right. So if we just think about that in terms of ecology, like people are coming online right now to the environmental degradation that's happening. There's a big environmental movement that's been happening for the last few decades and continues to like get heightened in this fever pitch around climate change and all these other aspects. And if scientists came out and said, we're on the verge of losing 50% of the world's biodiversity, people would lose their minds. They would lose their shit. And they would say, we have to do something about this right now. Right. And right now we are on the verge of losing, according to Wade Davis and other cultural anthropologists, of losing 50% of the world's languages. The biggest access point to culture, like language is the world through which we perceive our reality. It's the conforms, it's the structure in which we relate, it's how we think, it's how we speak, it's how we manipulate the breath that's moving through our lungs to express ourselves. And with that, there's the biggest access point to culture, to songs, to ritual, to ceremony, to even just the essence of what a language brings in the form of relationship. Great, with a plant, with how we speak about 100%. The mountain or the sky, and or grief, or to say ancestor or love in a different language. There's different frequencies. So like, or grief. And so for me, that's another practical, pragmatic reason of like, why now? Like there needs to be more cultural revival of old ways of being. And we see it within our the community that we're part of and within men's work of like the men in Europe coming back online with like the Celtic and Gaelic languages and roots. And bringing some of those beautiful pieces back through, which is like, for me, it's like we only know where we're going by where we've been. And colonizing, dominating culture wants to squash that away and create a new template. Right. and for me, it's really important to anchor back to the old ways. How did our ancestors do that? How we right now in the world are facing such a diverse array of issues and what you could call problems that need solving.
Yeah.
And we need diverse minds and cultures to come up with diverse solutions to them.
Yeah.
So that's another, if we're making like a chart of like pragmatic, like tick for the pragmatic, you know what I mean? Like there's so many different reasons why like the timing is now.
Yeah. Well,
for me.
I'm very glad that I asked because fuck yeah. I mean, you know, one of the reasons why you're talking about like the way that they speak differently, the way that they correlate things, you know, just the way that even their breath operates. One big thing for me is the way that these older cultures operated within grief, right? We don't slaughter our own food anymore, right? We buy it at the supermarket. There's a certain level of grief that lends itself to gratitude and humility, that allows for the civilization, the culture, in order to operate in a different way that is more in tune and more grounded with reality and not out of touch with reality. And there's a lot of wisdom and intelligence there. And we see that in their songs, like you said. Not all songs of these older cultures are just happy-go-lucky, like did. Like there's a moroseness to a lot of these songs, and it grounds us into the emotional aspect. It's like watching a Pixar movie instantly. You're already at the verge of bawling because there's so much emotion there. There's a certain level of grief that's online that allows for us to recognize what's important. And that's something that's really important to me as well, because if we're not there, where are we? Right? Because like I've said in the first one, as many others, like when shit hits the fan, when we have something very big to grieve, none of the other shit we were doing is important anymore. All the little things, all our businesses, everything that we were trying to do in order to try to prove our self-worth to the world or to each other, blah, 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 all these little tips that we had with family members, whatever it is, friends, blah, blah, all that goes away because like, oh shit, we might not have time left. I don't have time to play this game with you where we have infinite time, because the game of playing infinite time allows for me to basically put everything else on pause, including me choosing to be great, including choosing me to own my purpose and my mission, and including choosing to love you more. So I love that you brought that up, because essentially what you said is we don't have time left to waste because...
Or to wait.
Or to wait, because the ones who can teach us the old ways, like not only is our next morning not guaranteed, but theirs is not. And theirs is high chance less that they will be here tomorrow. And if we keep choosing to chase empty or very thin dreams or pursuits, all of that will fade and we will be left with a misery story of regret.
And not to say one's right or wrong.
One sucks more.
Opportunities and consequences.
One sucks more. We can agree on that. There might not be a right or wrong, but one definitely sucks more.
To me, well, to play that out further, right? If we're going to play out the crossroads. Yeah. It's just opportunities and consequences, right? The opportunity is some people act now, and there are lots of people that are cultural activists that are bridging through and continuing on old ways that are, and when I say elders, I'm talking about like your elders, my elders, and maybe elders of other people that are not part of my bloodline. And so like I think some people get lost when they say the elders or the ancestors. Like when I say ancestors, I'm talking about my ancestors in my lineage. Right. And then there's also other pieces of ancestors of the land, ancestors of the people that walked here before us, of course, so on and so forth.
If we go far enough back, a lot of our ancestors are the same ancestors, but
As Uncle Matoska says, the story that he tells himself is that if we go back far enough, my ancestors sat with your ancestors around a fire at some point in time.
Yeah, agreed.
So I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
The time is now.
Great train. The time is now.
Time is now.
And once again, to even clarify even further, what comes up for me when you say that, and what you just, I'm so glad I asked for you to be rational, because that was way beyond rational. That was super heartfelt. That was super spirit felt. And like, there's a reason why I'm still here in LA, because I got 99-year-old, 96-year-old, and 89-year-old grandparents still here, and I got my family that comes first. And one of the things that I talk about with these guests that I've had on here, like, not everyone here is in the most glamorous financial stature. They're not being like, hey, you tired of being poor? Do this, stay hard, blah, blah, blah. It's like, what choices have you made, and what choices are you continuing to make and are making now in order to live the most authentic, most honorable, integrous life that you can live? And what are you choosing to sacrifice in return? And some of those might be sacrificing fame or this or that or whatever for the sake of family, right? Or sacrificing losing my integrity to do something that would be financially fruitful in order to honor my legacy forward and backward, and to be able to keep in good relation with my family. That I find way more amazing than someone fucking doing some shady shit and just dishonoring their whole legacy and creating generational trauma once again, right? So
because that's in line with your value system.
Yeah, and I'd say that that's also, when we talk about like exposure, like you're saying, exposure, that's doing something different. That's doing something than what is being perpetuated as normalcy, right? Amidst a tide, a current that is pushing individuals to be like, hey, this is all good. Keep being fucking shitbags, be scum. There's no consequences for your actions. And for people to be like, actually, no, there's this moral compass within me that's being driven by what? Right? That's for each individual side. For me, I think it's because we know deep inside that we have a responsibility to be great, that we are ultimately worthy, and this whole narrative that we've been taught or that we're handed down is conflicting with the true narrative or the true understanding of ourselves, which is that we're ultimately worthy and that we're meant to do more and that we are meant to triumph in the face of adversity, or at least attempt to. And that story in itself is like that is the thing. Whether it's to die in, like, we could think of all these ways, like dying in battle or whatever. What is the battle, right? Or to work our lives to a space where we fight for honor, we fight for what's right, we fight for what has moral value and merit, right? That is a life worth living, and that's the stuff that lights me up. And so I would say, yeah, maybe it is in alignment with my values, and yet I'd say that it is the only thing that is truly valuable. Because if it is not in alignment with honoring our legacy and our past, is it just something fabricated and distorted and being paraded around as value, right? Food for thought, I don't know. But oh my gosh. Well, this has been a ride. It's been a ride, and you want to take a deep breath in with me?
Yeah, man.
Let's take a deep breath in. Another one? One more for the ancestors, for the collective of people in the world, for our future generations to come, all the beings. I want to thank you for sharing your story, for being vulnerable, for being passionate, for being challenged. I don't always challenge everyone on here with these questions. Sometimes I let them rip. Sometimes we're just like driving back and forth. And the reason why I do that also, and I think you already know this, is because I actually am genuinely curious, because I value your opinion, and I value your filter and or your the lens of perspective of which you've cultivated throughout your life in order to then give me or for me to receive that response, because I feel like that's truly essentially what we're doing is we're all filtering light, right? And you're a unique color, just like everyone who comes in here, and most people in the world are unique colors. We're all creating these, we're all on a spectrum of color. We're all our unique light based on our experiences and everything we've done. And some of us have like a sparkle, some of us have a glow, some of us have all sorts of different things that add on to that, the accoutrement of like who we are as a being, the essence of our being. And so that's why, and I'm grateful for you hanging in there with me as we go through it, because I am so deeply curious in the pursuit of this. And I feel like as we are doing it, we are doing the thing. As we are on the pursuit, we are doing the thing, regardless of what that result is, right? And so with that, thank you for joining me on the podcast, on the Magnanimous Collective. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Any closing words, any ways that you want for people to be able to know you, get in touch with you, anything that you want to say to the people, and you can say it to them on the camera if you want, or you can just say it to me, whatever you want to say.
Thank you, Sean.
Deep bows, bro. Appreciate you.
My heart goes out to people that are struggling, people that are hurting. And may my words of encouragement be wind in your sails, that there are ways that can lead you back to your journey to wholeness, and to stay curious, and remember that we need you. We need you. We need you here. We need you showing up. We need you connected to your heart. We need you connected to this planet. That you carry a unique frequency that is medicine to this planet, to your community. And my prayer is that we live long and healthy lives, and may our souls learn all the lessons they came here to learn.
Oh.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, brother. This has been the Magnanimous Collective with Jordan Trujillo. Till next time, y'all. We out. Peace. Love you.